fire.
I get involved with the sound design very early on. When I'm doing picture cutting, I like to have a library of sound effects that I can throw right into the cut, as the picture and the sound need to evolve simultaneously. So we brought Chris Boyes, sound designer, on very early, 2 years ahead of time. We developed this huge library of sounds, all different sounds, from wing flaps and banshee screeches, and then I just slapped them against picture. So in a way, my selection process was not a review process. I was actually cutting. I'd say, oh, I like that sound, I'd put that in. And that's how I created the specific vocabulary, drawing from sounds that Chris had proposed for these different things.
While the sound that we've created may have originated from an animal or a jungle ambience or even a helicopter, by the time that my crew has taken it and we manipulate it in such a way that it becomes something unique to Avatar that has a grounding in reality so that the audience can sort of understand the sound and relate it to the real world. The interesting thing about Pandora is that it's got to be a hyperactive, bioluminescent jungle. So you're given license to get really wild with the sounds of the bugs flying by, with the sound of distant creatures off in the jungle somewhere. Just with the dripping of the leaves and everything, you can get sort of more immersed in it, and you're allowed to let sound sort of play that role of wrapping you up in this world. This jungle is so saturated with colors and things floating in the sky that you've never seen before. For instance, the first time that Jake finds himself lost in the forest, you hear distant calls from all around of creatures that you can't really put your finger on what this creature is, but it's not a comforting call. And meanwhile, as you go down into the forest, you hear sort of sounds of scurrying animals all around you, but you can't really figure out where they're coming from. And at the same time, the entire forest itself is alive, almost as if the leaves and the trees are sort of moving and swaying and breathing in the immediate surroundings. The banshee, to some extent, I sort of related it to a flying horse, if you will, because like a horse, it's a creature that is wild and then becomes domesticated like a horse. The cry itself was the hardest part. I experimented with a tremendous amount of large raptors, birds, as well as a lot of baby creatures, baby cougars, baby swine, baby cubs of various different natures. And I just started building a palette of calls and sent them down to Jim, and he started picking some of the ones that he liked.
People have talked a lot about the Na'vi language and what it took to build the Na'vi language. They never talked about the Banshee language, but there is a Banshee language. It makes all kinds of different sounds, and those sounds mean different things. There's the distant call, and then there's a kind of a greeting cry, and there's a threat hiss, and they have different levels of aggression. And then there's a kind of little squeaky shriek that it makes when it's stressed and it submits away from an encounter. And then there's a threat display, roar.
If you think of the banshee as being this bird the size of a Cessna, the Leonopteryx is a sort of 747. And it's massive vocal that not only can it cry out, but when it cries out, the entire universe hears it. This huge, chesty, rumbling cry with a sort of very powerful note of terror in it. The wing flaps were another really fun thing that I think worked out really well in that, you know, they've got to cut the air with a very crisp, clean sound, but at the same time they have to be pushing enough air that you really feel this thing has the power to do these incredible maneuvers.
Go, go!
The dire horse was a sound that Gary Rydstrom and I created that as a bark element for a creature in Jurassic Park. Jim liked that sound, and so I took some walrus and African crane sounds and sort of created the same thing, doing with different creatures. And in the end, we sort of went back to the original recording of the mating tortoise and developed a new version of it. And now in the film, there's a little bit of both, but they all live in the same sort of world, and it's very much a honking bark. The Thanator is a medley of a lot of different animals. For instance, the footsteps were developed by taking large cat prancing around his cage. And it has a leopard cry that's very much its signature. I remember reading the script and thinking, oh no, this guy's gotta be really badass. And at the same time, have a lot of components based in rage, but also sort of raging frustration. The Valkyrie is very much a component of a rocket and a jet. And there's a really fun scene in the very beginning of the film when they descend down to Pandora. And it's a sweeping, epic moment. We sort of built the rocket rumble to be this big, low-end, weighty component, and then the jet component, sort of a high-frequency component, to leave room for the music to breathe and live, and it's very effective. One of the craziest aircraft in the film is the Dragon, which Courage flies. Jim described initially as having a very strong turbine component and then the rotor chop. We built all sorts of different sounds of the Dragon, the Samson, and the Scorpion. And it was important to us that you could tell, that's a Samson, that's a Scorpion. We've been recording guns for years now, and we recorded a lot of new ones for this film. And Jim is very adamant that they sound appropriate to what they're firing. And so the amp suit has to sound like the most massive cannon you ever heard. Then when you go back to, you know, say Courage's machine gun, you really want to have that be very live and very poppy and bright and articulate, so that's very much like a machine gun that we would hear here on Earth. The toughest challenge has been the final mix, because we have literally hundreds and hundreds of layers of sound, and it's finding what maybe 5 or 6 layers Jim really wants to hear, and getting all those components with this incredible score and with the dialogue and putting that all together and still keeping the path that Jim sort of built in his temp mix has been a challenge. But I have to say at the same time, I have the greatest crew on the planet so that we can achieve what Jim wants.
All right, let's turn up the heat.
Action!
Sweet.
I actually had started thinking about the movie and, trying to do some ideas for the movie. And I took a bunch of stunt people on our own and we started doing some ideas for the film. And then I finally got to come in and meet, John Landau and, James Cameron. And they looked at some of the stuff I had done and, thought it was interesting, and I thought, let's, use you as a stunt coordinator. And so I got to read the script, and then we started choreographing. Okay, so we pull him in, headbutt, smashed inside of his leg. Brought in a lot of different stunt performers, male and female. We had to design not just the stunts, but also the movements that would be associated with the Navis. These creatures on this planet can move like lemurs, jumping from limb to limb on a tree, and run as fast as any kind of panther or cheetah you'd see through a tree, and move like a cat, but still they're two-legged, human-like creatures. So we had to design fight scenes that would help those movements out. We had about a month and a half to start doing some kind of training with the actors, before the movie. We worked with them on how to fly with a wire, run and jump with a wire, and do some of the different movements in the fights. It's a lot more difficult than I would have thought. We had to constantly be on them every day about how they were fighting. We had to take Sam and teach him how to be military as well, so we got him a military trainer. So someone came down and showed him what it's like to hold a gun and all the other things that would be associated with being a Marine, which is the character he is.
Sam's a surfer, and so when I started talking about flying the Banshees and the Leonopterics like a board sport, like this kind of athletic thing, he really got into that. And so when it came time to ride the Leonopter, he's got this whole other thing, because he has to fly, he has to hold on with one hand, and he has to fire a .30 caliber machine gun, door gun from the helicopter with his other hand. So Sam and I worked together to come up with these kind of surf-based moves.
Zoe was great with movement, We taught her how to run, how to jump on a wire, how to shoot her bow.
I love it. I was a dancer for 10 years, and I always wanted to do a film where I was physically challenged, not only mentally. Garrett, he has this vast knowledge. Not only can he do like a martial art thing and not make it look really artsy, and he can also do like a natural thing without making it look too primitive, and it's sort of like a blend.
Good. There was a person that we used to teach her wushu, and his name was Keith Cook. The wushu training lent itself greatly toward these Na'vi beings because, that Chinese style deals with animal styles. So we wanted them to have more of a animal kind of a movement while still being human being-ish. The biggest set pieces for the stunt department really have been this thing that we call the beanstalk, which is actually a bunch of huge rocks entwined inside of vines that are being held and suspended in air by mountains, and we have to go through not just climbing rocks, but also how to climb through the vines and jump from space to space because the rocks aren't together. They have to be able to jump from one rock to the next rock and then climb vines the way that the Na'vis would. We have one fantastic performer, his name is Ilram Choi. He's got to be able to do not just a flip and a spin in the air and hit the ground, but Ilram gets to be Sute's double. But also sometimes we might use him to do a move for Natiri. He might be a hunter or